What has become more clear since last we met? The question posed by Ralph Waldo Emerson. It's a deliberate question intended to create meaningful conversation around self-reliance, wisdom, and truth. But let's see if we can't ask this question in a very different way. Let's see if we can't flip this question on its head. So as I sat and contemplated this question, I did not get answers. You know what I got? More questions. And the question that continued to come up for me was, what has become more clear since first we met? The word last and the word first being in opposition to one another, being exact opposites. We know end is the end of an order or sequence. First being its exact opposite, that is to say, the beginning. So as you all can imagine, as I sat with this question, I had to get still sometimes, get a little bit quiet, and just see what came up for me. And I thought a lot about Todd Fletcher. Emerson hour, Emerson hour, Emerson hour. The first thing that came to my mind was the law of duality. The law of duality suggests that all things have a complementary opposite. Good and bad, up and down, left and right, love and hate. You all get the picture, right? So all things interconnected, intertwined, working in perfect harmony with and against one another to create the richness and fullness of the human experience. So considering that all things exist in opposition to one another, or maybe in cooperation with one another, it again got me back to the question, what has become more clear since first we met? The word we then came up for me. You can't escape it. It's the second to last word in the phrase. But what is the we intended to suggest? Is the we intended to suggest what insights, revelations, and wisdoms have I gained so that I could share with all of you here today in this moment? Or is the we me? And considering the law of duality, because I exist, I do indeed have an exact opposite, an alternate side, another side to myself. And that would be true. The man I was has met the man he wanted to be, especially the last couple of years. The man he desired to be. Oh, hell, you know what? The man he longed to be. Let me see if I can explain this, because it didn't just happen like that. So many of you do not know this, but I spent nearly 20 years as a police officer in the San Antonio Police Department. I'm also a veteran of the United States Air Force. Go Air Force. My last several years as a police officer were some of the most mission-driven, purposeful work I had ever engaged in as the wellness and resiliency officer. I thought, man, I could do this for the rest of my life. Certainly for the rest of my career. People knew me. People needed me. People depended on me. And then guess what? It all got taken from me. Just like that. My career went from light to dark, like a light switch being flipped down in an instant. A decision made for me, a decision out of my control. Looking back, a decision gifted to me. Do you remember that scene at the end of Castaway where Tom Hanks gets out of his Jeep and he's drinking a bottle of water, like I need right now? He's drinking a bottle of water and he walks up to this intersection and he's looking at all these different roads going to seemingly nowhere, and he has a decision. That was me. That's where I was at. I had a decision to make. So I did what I believed was the right thing, the terrifying thing. I resigned. Looking back on that was one of the most difficult decisions I've ever had to make. But I was at a crossroads, and the decision needed to be made. I resigned to no longer being called Officer Marotta. I resigned to just being Mike, just a regular guy, just a civilian. I did not know at a conscious level that this was the right thing to do, but what I did know was that there was this part of me that craved freedom, that wanted to be unbound to the legacy of my brokenness. Another story for another time. This was in early 2022. And what began from that point was a journey in self-exploration. And up to this point, I had been doing what people call the work, and I'd made some pretty profound revelations. But you're talking about a lifetime of negative messaging that I still needed to unravel. So remember what has become more clear since first we met? Since I met me, Mike had been beaten, battered, bruised, told he wasn't enough, told he wasn't lovable, told he wasn't worthy, told he wasn't going to amount to anything. And guess what? I treated everybody around me exactly the same. I recreated these negative stories in my head again and again and again. And out of my own lack of awareness, I recreated these experiences again and again and again. It wasn't until I resigned, it was the first time I felt hope. Sounds weird. That was the first time that I could see this alternate version of myself. It was like I was kind of peeking over through the mirror and I could see kind of the tops of my eyes. I was still very much hiding from the man who I needed to be, but I knew something needed to change. And oh, by the way, something else that I discovered at this point in my life is that there was a lot of people and experiences that I was being met with that were trying to reflect back to me who I needed to be. They were trying. Which brings me to the second law, the law of attraction, which in terms of core beliefs posits that your thoughts and emotions about yourself and the world in which you occupy define your reality, and your reality is going to define your identity. I've talked a lot about core beliefs, and why wouldn't I? They led me into a marriage at 19 years old. We're still together, by the way. Yep. Thank you. By the grace of God. By the grace of God. They led me into a career in law enforcement and led me to break and destroy everything around me with great success, I might add. I broke hearts. I broke walls. I broke spirits. I broke relationships. Now, I've talked a lot about these core beliefs, and all this began to change one day in a one-on-one session with my therapist. And I sat in there with that man, and I justified smashing the entire center console of my truck with my right hand in a fit of rage. And he listened intently, and then he looked at me very clearly and very directly and said this: "I'll never want to be friends with a guy like you." And I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that. It changed everything. I said, who am I? Who have I become? What kind of a human being? How can I get out from under the shame and guilt and the pain of all this? That was a hard time. A lot of people ask me in the work I do, how'd you do it, Mike? What was the moment? What was the moment for you that you changed? And I tell them all the same thing. It wasn't a moment. It was actually a collection of moments. But I can tell you this, being in that room with that therapist that day, that was definitely one. The second was the day I realized that I was a victim to my own reasoned choices. I was not an active participant in it. I don't have the time right now. In fact, I might be out of time to break down the entire formula for you. But here's what I want to leave with you. Here's what I want to impart with you right here, right now. The one thing, what has become more clear since first we met? Choice. You have a choice in every situation. Choose. Choose this choice in action. Choose. You don't need to be a victim to what is, and you can choose what can be. Choose love or choose fear. Love says you can when fear says you can't. Love says you're enough when fear says, who the hell do you think you are? Love says the world needs more of you when fear says, why are you even here? Love's embraces, wraps around, cares for, shows empathy to. Fear separates, disconnects, and isolates. Today, choose love and acceptance. Today, choose the journey of self-exploration and self-discovery. Today, choose forgiveness, understanding, wisdom, and truth. Today, own the other side of your story. Today, know that your legacy has great power, and your legacy will live in perpetuity from here until forevermore. Today, I hope you all know that a life well lived ends with Mike loved and was loved. And by the way, most of the time I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. Love y'all.